A dead man, a vegetable garden, and a turnip no one could explain. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Let's grow this mystery-loving community. Tell me where you're watching from. I always look forward to reading your comments. It was a Tuesday, which meant roast squaw for lunch and Fritz humming Bach while browning the skin. I was at my desk, sorting through the morning's mail, when the doorbell rang at 11:07 a.m. too late for casual callers and too early for trouble, which meant we were about to get both. I buzzed the front latch. A minute later, the knock came at the office door. Wolfe, planted in his throne behind the desk like a Roman senator in exile, didn't move. I got up and opened the door. The woman who stepped in had the face of a farmer's daughter, but the eyes of someone who'd learned about people the hard way. She wore a navy coat too light for the weather and carried a leather satchel like it had once been used to carry secrets. "I'm looking for Mr. Wolfe," she said. "You found him." I told her. Now let's see if he's interested in being found. Wolfe flicked a glance up from the book in his lap, a dog-eared treatise on root vegetables, courtesy of the French Academy of Gastronomy. That should have been my first clue. Name, he said. Hazel Grieve. Profession, I'm in heirloom vegetables. Wolfe didn't blink, but his fingers tightened on the pages of his book. Fritz had planted 3 rows of rare Austrian turnips last spring, and Wolfe had spent weeks pontificating on their complex starch composition. "You sell them?" Wolfe asked. "I breed them," she said. "And yes, sell them. Restaurants, chefs, sometimes even universities. I consult, too." "I don't consult," Wolfe replied, "and I do not investigate agricultural patents." "I'm not here about patents," she said. "I'm here because something went missing, and then someone else did. That got me. I gestured her to the red chair. She sat, but on the edge, like someone ready to run if the wrong question was asked. Wolfe shifted in his chair with the grace of a sinking battleship. "Continue, Miss Grieve." Briefly, she opened her bag and took out a small, waxed paper envelope. Inside was what looked like a shriveled, angry radish. "This is a turnip," she said. "My turnip. It's called the Fireback Crown. I bred it over 8 years. It's peppery, slightly bitter, with a late sweet finish. A chef at Langstaff's called it the foie gras of root vegetables." "That's florid nonsense," Wolfe muttered. "I'll take your word," I said. "Where does the missing part come in?" 6 weeks ago, I had 5 dozen firebacks stored in a secured crate. One crate was stolen. It contained not just turnips, but a journal, my breeding notes, names of collaborators, even projected genetic crossings. Wolfe's eyes finally lifted. "That is your intellectual property?" She nodded. "Yes, but here's where it gets worse. One of my former research partners, Milo Cafferty, recently died. Officially, it was a fall from his fire escape. But he and I had argued about the fireback. He wanted to take it commercial before the genetics stabilized. Did he steal the crate? I asked. I don't know, but he knew where it was kept. So did 3 others: Colleen Vestal, Gerard Bell, and Dr. Amos Prigg. I blinked. Prigg, she ignored me. All of them had access. All of them had reasons. But Milo was the only one who wanted to rush it to market. Now he's dead. Wolfe grunted. Miss Grieve, you're presenting a mystery about a vegetable. That is barely tolerable. That it may involve profit motives, betrayal, and death does not make it more palatable, merely more pungent. Mr. Wolfe, she said softly, the fireback crown is a masterpiece. Someone is going to profit off it without attribution or conscience. If Milo was silenced, I'm next, you believe. Someone killed Mr. Cafferty over a turnip. I believe someone stole from me. I believe someone might kill again. And I believe you're the only one who might care why. Wolfe exhaled. Phooey. I care because someone has interfered with the sanctity of good food. Archer fetched the checkbook. That surprised even me. We're taking the case? Wolfe gave me a slow glance, the kind he usually reserved for waiters who dared suggest canned truffles. Someone is threatening the future of one of the few vegetables I have ever voluntarily consumed. Yes, we are taking the case. Hazel handed Wolfe a sheet of paper. These are the names and last known locations of the others. And I have one more thing. She dug into her coat and pulled out a small glass vial. Inside was a smear of dark paste. This was mailed to me yesterday. No note, no sender, just the paste. Wolfe leaned forward to examine it. What is it? I believe, she said, it's a puree of fireback turnip, treated with oxalic acid. Poisoned, I said. She nodded. We all sat silent for a moment. Then Wolfe said, Archie, you will contact Mr. Saul Panzer. Have him begin with Mr. Bell and Miss Vestal. We must establish the chain of possession and who precisely broke it. I stood. What about Dr. Prigg? Wolfe raised a brow. Interview him yourself. With delicacy. I want to know what he thinks of bitterness, culinary or otherwise. Hazel stood and hesitated at the door. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. I know this is unusual. Miss Grieve, Wolfe said, the unusual is tolerable. The abominable, less. So, good day. She left, and I turned to Wolfe. You really believe someone killed a guy over a turnip? I believe, Wolfe said, that someone attempted to poison Miss Grieve using a gourmet root vegetable. That is sufficient provocation. He reached for the buzzer. Tell Fritz, no turnips until further notice. They are now evidence. Fritz didn't argue when I passed on Wolfe's instruction to ban turnips from the kitchen. He only narrowed his eyes like a man betrayed and muttered something in German that might have translated to culinary sabotage. By the time I returned to the office, Wolfe had already cracked a fresh notebook and was scribbling names in his careful block. Script Grieve, Cafferty, Vestal, Bell, Prigg. Wolfe wasn't a man to rush, and he certainly wasn't one to tolerate intellectual vagueness. But there was something in his posture, shoulders less slouched, fingers tapping the pen against the desk, that told me his gourmand's heart had been scratched in just the right place. Somebody had tampered with flavor. That wasn't just theft. That was desecration. I made the call to Saul Panzer first. If you need a man followed without him knowing it or even suspecting it's all's your guy. He was on it in less than 5 minutes, promising to check in before nightfall. Wolfe would want schedules, sightings, the tenor of conversation, and the number of times Gerard Bell scratched his ear or Colleen Vestal looked out a window to long. Saul would deliver. That left me with Dr. Amos Prigg. He operated out of a brown brick building off Madison, the kind of low-rent lab complex that looked like a dentist's office with delusions of NIH grandeur. I made the trip there by cab, mostly because I didn't feel like playing the subway sardine game, and because I wanted to arrive without the faint aroma of third-rail arson. Prigg's office was on the second floor. The sign on the frosted glass said, A. Prigg, Ph.D., Agrogenetics and Biochemical Analysis. The kind of title that lets you charge triple just for using the word isomer. He opened the door himself, tall, bony, prematurely grey, and clearly unbothered by the presence of other humans. His handshake was limp and dry as old celery. Yes? He asked, like I was interrupting a eureka moment instead of just existing in his doorway. I gave him my card. Archie Goodwin. I'm here on behalf of Nero Wolfe. He's investigating a matter concerning Hazel Grieve. I don't know who that is, he said flatly. I let that one sit there for a moment, like a dropped wrench on concrete. She says you collaborated on rootstock variation with her specifically on a turnip strain, called the Fireback Crown. He blinked, not quickly, like the thought had to pass through a dozen chambers before it made it to the eyes. Oh, that Hazel Grieve. Yes, we published a small study 2 years ago. She's rather aggressive. She claims the strain was stolen, I said, and that someone may have used it to deliver poison. Prigg didn't flinch. Then she should call the police. She did, I said. But now she's called Wolfe, which means we don't think it was a street corner burglary. I had nothing to do with the storage of the specimens, he said, already looking past me to some inner space that probably held test tubes. My interest was strictly academic. Did Milo Cafferty have access? His gaze slid back to me. Yes, Milo was always around the lab. He was interested in commercial exploitation. Hazel says he died a week ago. You hear about that? I did. I assumed it was clumsy intoxication. I made a note, and that doesn't strike you as worth a second thought. No, he said. Not everything is a conspiracy. I was starting to get the impression Dr. Prigg wouldn't be fun at cocktail hour. Do you know if Milo had any of the Fireback specimens? He asked me for them. I declined. I didn't trust his intentions. But you knew he had access to Hazel's storage? I suspected. Milo liked shortcuts. He considered ethics to be a matter of opinion. That gave me a tickle of something, the start of a thread. I stood. Last question, Doc. Anyone else express interest in the turnip lately? Offers? Weird emails? Break-ins? I hung up and gave Wolfe the digest version. He didn't respond right away. He just rubbed his chin and muttered, "Vegetable vainglory, phooey." I took that as approval. I want Bell, Wolfe said. Here, tonight, 8 o'clock, as a guest. Sure. Should I send a lace-edged invitation or just a brass knucklegram? He waved a hand. Invite him politely. Play to his pride. Tell him Hazel recommended he explain himself. He'll come. He might not stay. Then I will speak. Quickly. I made the call. Gerard Bell didn't pick up the first time. The second time, he did. His voice was slippery with practiced casualness. Gerard Bell. Archie Goodwin, I said. I work with Nero Wolfe. A pause. Not long, but jagged. Yes? Mr. Wolfe would like to extend you an invitation to speak tonight. 8 sharp at the brownstone. I see. Is Hazel going to be there? Not unless you want her to be. But she's the one who suggested we talk to you. Another pause. What's this about? I think you know, I said, and then didn't say anything else. He exhaled. All right. 8. When I relayed that to Wolfe, he nodded once. Then buzzed Fritz and gave orders for something light and utterly non-cruciferous for dinner. He didn't want the air perfumed with anything turnip adjacent. That evening, I met Gerard Bell at the door. He wore a chef's jacket under a tweed overcoat, and he reeked of cardamom and conceit. He stepped into the office like he was walking into an audition. Wolfe didn't rise, of course, just inclined his head the way a mountain might if it felt diplomatic. Mr. Bell, Wolfe said. Sit. Bell glanced at me before taking the green leather chair. He'd perched on the edge, like he wanted to leave a space in case he needed to bolt. I'm a fan of your reputation, Bell said. I just didn't expect it to be so upholstered. Indeed. Wolfe replied, let us speak directly. You have obtained a specimen of the fireback crown. From whom? Bell blinked. I haven't. No pretense, Wolfe interrupted. You have either stolen it, been gifted it under false pretenses, or acquired it through a third party. Which is it? Bell's eyes darted to me, then to the desk, then back. Why does it matter? It matters, Wolfe said, because you are in possession of a contaminated cultivar, one that may be responsible for the death of Milo Cafferty, and one which, I suspect, you are too ignorant to properly contain. Bell's face drained. You think it killed Milo? I do not think, Wolfe said sharply. I deduce. Mr. Cafferty was experimenting with the strain. He died in his apartment. No signs of struggle, but the symptoms described in the coroner's notes: nausea, disorientation. Convulsions are consistent with oxalate poisoning, possibly from a compound derivative of unstable rootstock. Bell swallowed. His tongue clicked against his teeth. I didn't know, he said. I swear I didn't know. Who gave it to you? I asked. Bell hesitated. It was left for me. In a box. No note. Just a clamshell case with 6 cleaned roots. I assumed. Well, I assumed Hazel sent them. Because, Wolfe asked, because we'd argued. I told her she was wasting the potential. I said if she didn't share it, someone else would. Then they just showed up. Did you eat one? No. I cooked one. Sliced it. Tasted a bit raw. It burned. He shivered. Not spice. Just wrong. Where is the rest? Wolfe asked. In my locker. At the school. You will not return to the school, Wolfe said calmly. You will go directly to Sol Panzer. Who will collect the container under supervision, and you will not tamper with the locker. Bell slumped in the chair. This was supposed to be a big break. I didn't mean, no one ever means, Wolfe said. They only do. Bell nodded, stood, and left without another word. When the door closed, Wolfe steepled his fingers. Someone wanted Hazel implicated. Someone with access to the failed. Strain, someone who could plant it in Bell's path. Prig? I asked. Possibly. But Prig lacks imagination. Colleen Vestal, she burned something. We don't know what. We will, Wolfe said. Tomorrow she comes here. He stood then slowly, begrudgingly, and with the weight of a man lifting 1,000 suspicions. I must think. Fritz will prepare chamomile. You will document all conversations and have Saul monitor Miss Vestal. We are close now, Archie. Close to what? I asked. He looked at me and gave a faint, rare smile to plucking the last root from the bed. By 10 the next morning, Wolfe had consumed 2 eggs, 6 ounces of grilled trout, and half a pot of Darjeeling. He was leaning back in his chair with the air of a man who had been slighted by the very concept of deception. The morning paper lay on the side table. Untouched, he already had all the headlines he needed. Saul had retrieved the clamshell case from Gerard Bell's locker the night before. He dropped it off after midnight with the solemnity of a man delivering a live grenade. Wolfe, despite his usual disdain for nocturnal activity, had taken one look, sniffed, and declared the contents a botanical provocation. They now rested under lock and key in the pantry freezer, triple-sealed in a vacuum container, and labeled pending oblivion in Wolfe's own handwriting. At precisely 10:32 a.m., Colleen Vestal arrived. She was 35, sharp-featured, and dressed like she either worked at a non-profit or sold high-end terrariums. When I led her into the office, she carried a woven tote and the look of someone who had already regretted saying yes to this. Appointment. Wolfe didn't rise, of course. Miss Vestal, please sit. She did, but warily, with one eye on me and the other on Wolfe's face as if gauging which of us would pounce first. I've been told, she said coolly, that you're investigating Hazel Grieve. I find that difficult to believe. She's not the type to lie or steal. She may not be the type, Wolfe said, but she is the context. Colleen didn't answer. She just crossed one leg over the other and waited. I understand. Wolfe continued that you and Mr. Cafferty were both involved in the Bayfield trials. Colleen's face twitched. Yes, briefly. Milo was more involved than I was. He loved the idea of reshaping vegetables' genetic authorship, he called it. Like he wanted to patent a poem. And you? I preferred control to creation. The fireback was unstable. I told Hazel to halt the trial after the second mutation cycle. She didn't. And yet you remained associated with the project, I said. Colleen shrugged, out of curiosity and concern. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. Miss Vestal, someone attempted to frame Hazel Grieve. A contaminated strain was delivered anonymously to Mr. Bell. Milo Cafferty is dead. You burned documents last week. What were they? Her jaw tensed. Old notes. Nothing important. If they were unimportant, you wouldn't have burned them. Colleen stared at Wolfe for a long moment, then sighed. They were drafts from Milo. He wrote a pitch letter to a food lab in California, Aurelius Foods. He was trying to sell the fire back. Without Hazel's knowledge. Was the letter dated? Wolfe asked. Yes. 3 weeks ago. That would be just before his death. Yes. Did you confront him? I warned him, she said. I told him it wasn't safe. That the genetics hadn't stabilized. He brushed me off. Why destroy the letter? Colleen hesitated. Because Hazel doesn't need more enemies. And because if someone finds out Milo tried to sell a strain that killed him, they'll blame her. Even if she didn't know. Wolfe closed his eyes for a beat. But now I know. So what is it? You're afraid of, Miss Vestal, that I'll tell the truth, or that I'll guess more than I'm told. I'm afraid, she said slowly, that whoever really killed Milo isn't finished, and they're a step ahead of all of us. That, I admit, caught my ear. Wolfe opened his eyes again. Explain. She reached into her tote and pulled out a flash drive. This came in the mail yesterday. No return address, just this. And a note that said, watch closely. He watched carelessly. Wolfe motioned to me. I took the drive, went to the adjoining office, and plugged it into Wolfe's desktop machine. After a minute, a video file opened. The resolution was grainy, but the sound was clean. The footage showed Milo Cafferty, alone in a lab space. He was seated at a table, trimming turnips with a scalpel. One in particular caught his attention. He cut into it, sniffed it, then recoiled. He didn't toss it, though. He peeled it further, then mashed part of the flesh into a mortar. Then he tasted it. The video didn't show his reaction, but the timestamp continued. 32 minutes later, he collapsed onto the floor, shaking. I watched it twice. Then I shut it down and returned. Someone filmed Milo's final experiment, I said. They knew what would happen, and they let it. I handed the drive to Wolfe. He looked at Colleen. Why send this to you? No idea. Unless someone wanted me to panic. Did you? I came here, didn't I? Wolfe folded his hands. Miss Vestal, we now possess evidence that Milo Cafferty was deliberately allowed or perhaps encouraged to consume a fatal sample. Someone captured that moment and distributed the proof. That suggests orchestration, not accident. Do you think Hazel sent the drive? She asked. He hesitated, his lips pressed together like a reluctant zip file. There was a man, he said finally, visited the lab last month. Said he was from a culinary research group. Asked strange questions. Name? I didn't get one. He wore gloves. Indoors. That was enough for now. I thanked him and left. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in his chair and Fritz in an attitude of restrained martyrdom, chopping carrots with all the suppressed rage of a composer writing dirges. In silence, I gave Wolfe the full rundown while pouring myself a glass of the sherry he only allows when he's curious, but trying not to show it. Prigg's a sphinx, I told him, but he admitted Milo was sniffing around for personal gain. And he confirmed Milo wanted access to the strain after Hazel shut him out. Wolfe nodded once. And this visitor, gloved, nameless, sniffing around Prigg's lab, doesn't scream academic curiosity. No, Wolfe said. It suggests covert intent and confidence. We both paused when the phone rang. I picked it up. Saul Panzer's voice came through, clear as a fingerprint. I've tailed Gerard Bell all day. He's working prep at a private culinary school in Brooklyn. Spent an hour in the supply room on a call. Mentioned Hazel twice. Said she was getting too twitchy. Anyone else? Colleen Vestal. Lives in Queens. I watched her leave work, head straight home. She burned something in her fireplace. Small. Paper. That got Wolfe's eyebrows to do their rare twitch. Stay on Bell, he said, after I relayed it. He is the most overtly nervous. That can be useful or fatal. Fatal to who? I asked. That remains to be seen. Wolfe closed his notebook with a thump. Then he rang for Fritz and declared dinner would be an asparagus risotto. I took that as a sign of two things. He was warming to Hazel Greaves' predicament and he was circling something in his head. I just wasn't sure if the circle ended round Bell, Prig, or someone still out in the field, cultivating malice among the roots. The next morning started with bacon, eggs, and Wolfe announcing he would not entertain visitors until after orchid time, which, to be fair, wasn't news. What was? News was the envelope that arrived by messenger at precisely 9:28 a.m. Addressed in no-nonsense block letters to Nero Wolfe, confidential. No return address, no logo, just wait to it. The kind of envelope that carries either a check or a threat. I handed it over unopened. Wolfe took it with a grunt, slit it with his ivory-handled letter opener, and pulled out two items, a Polaroid photograph and a single sheet of typed paper. He examined both silently, which, for Wolfe, is the equivalent of a Broadway standing ovation. He passed them to me. The photo showed a crate wooden, rectangular, and stamped with property of Grieve Farms do not open. It had been pried open along the lid. Inside were what looked like turnips, some intact, others split or cut. A gloved hand was holding one of them up to the camera lens like it was a moon rock. The tight note read, "You're looking in the wrong places. Hazel Grieve is lying. Ask her about what happened at Bayfield. The fireback crown has always been tainted. No signature. No threats. Just that cold statement and a blurry photo. That looked like it was taken in a basement lit by a single bulb." Wolfe held out his hand. I gave him the envelope again. He turned it over, squinting at the flap. No seal. He murmured, "Moisture adhesive, applied by brush, likely synthetic." He handed it back. "Archie, call Miss Grieve. Tell her to present herself at 11 sharp. We will discuss Bayfield. She's not going to like that. She may be displeased." Wolfe said, "But I, too, am displeased. I don't enjoy being lied to, especially before lunch." Hazel arrived at 10:57. I'd already made the coffee and set out Wolfe's morning beer, which he ignored. Never a good sign. When she came into the office, she looked tired and tense, like a woman who'd heard the creak of her own cellar door one too many times. "You summoned me?" she asked, staying near the archway. "Enter," Wolfe said. "Sit." She did, but slowly. Wolfe reached into the drawer, pulled out the note and the photo. and placed them side by side on the desk in front of her. She didn't touch them. Her eyes flicked across the contents and froze on the word Bayfield. "I see," she said. "No," Wolfe said. "You don't explain." She glanced at me, then back to Wolfe. "Bayfield was an experimental plot I ran 2 years ago. Northern Pennsylvania. Good soil. High-altitude testing. I used it to develop early strains of the fireback. One crop turned unstable. Define." "Unstable," Wolfe said. "They crossbred. Some of the turnips began to mutate. Visually, they looked fine, but the taste turned metallic and into cases. They caused minor digestive distress. I had the entire plot burned and filed it as a failed test. Did Mr. Cafferty know? He helped burn the field." Wolfe's mouth twitched. "Then he also knew what a successful strain could command." "Yes," she said. "That's why I think he stole the crate. To resell it maybe even to someone who didn't know the history." "Did any of the Bayfield strains survive?" I asked. "No," she said, then hesitated. "I don't think so. One test jar might have been stored in a secondary freezer, but it was sealed, Miss Grieve." Wolfe said slowly, "If someone has a sample of that strain, they could extract material for propagation or for harm. If they are clever, are your notes specific enough to guide them?" She didn't answer right away, then nodded. "Yes, that was a grievous error." I winced at the pun. Wolfe didn't blink. "But that doesn't explain why someone's trying to pin this on me," she said. "I'm the one who's been robbed." "Possibly," Wolfe said. "But consider another proposition. What if Mr. Cafferty did not die by accident, but by exposure to a contaminated strain? What if whoever sent this note blames you for his death because he used your data, and it killed him?" Hazel went pale. "But I didn't." "No," Wolfe said. "You didn't kill him. But perhaps you didn't stop him either." Silence hung for a moment, thick as split pea soup. I finally broke it. "We've got one person dead. One person. Scared, and someone anonymous trying to stir the pot. What's the play, Wolfe?" Wolfe tapped the tip of his finger on the photograph. "This hand. The glove is industrial latex, not surgical. The angle of the light indicates a single overhead bulb, likely not in a commercial space. The crate shows stress marks on the side suggesting it's been moved recently, with force. I want to know where that photo was taken. You want me to analyze the lighting. I want you to find the crate. And what if it's already been found? The crate." He picked up the photograph and turned it slightly. "And find out who wears size 8 latex gloves and knows how to handle heirloom root vegetables." "I'll call Saul," I said, heading for the hall. Maybe it's time he pays a visit to that culinary school again. See if Belle's been handling anything other than onions. Wolfe closed his eyes. He will also inquire about the waste disposal at that location. If someone burned paper in a fireplace, another may have discarded evidence in a compost heap. Hazel stood. "If you think I'm hiding something, I know you are," Wolfe interrupted. "But not what you think." She opened her mouth, then thought better of it and turned on her heel. After she left, Wolfe let out a long breath and rubbed his thumb over the bridge of his nose. "We are now investigating a murder committed by agricultural negligence," he muttered. "Phooey, that's what you get for taking root vegetables seriously," I said. He opened his eyes and looked at me. "You may jest, Archie, but someone has made a weapon of gastronomy, and I intend to disarm them." I went to call Saul. Wolfe leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, thinking about poison, turnips, and the ethics of fermentation. By the time Saul called back, it was 3:40 p.m., and Wolfe had switched from sulking in silence to sulking with a book in his lap. The title was The Botanic Sins of Europe, and I didn't ask. I picked up on the first ring. "Talk," I said. Saul's voice was low and precise. "I got into the loading bay behind the culinary school. Place smells like a mix of lemon oil, old lard, and bragging. I checked their compost. Nothing special unless you count to turnip tops, some wine corks, and what looked like a burned scrap of a shipping label." My ears perked. Shipping label. Yeah, corner of it survived. It's charred, but I made out part of the word. Grieve and a partial zip code. Looks like someone burned packaging material recently carelessly. "That squares with the crate being moved," I said. "Anyone acting squirrely? Gerard Bell." Saul confirmed. He saw me, pretended not to, but 10 minutes later, he made a call. I couldn't catch the conversation, but I got the number he dialed. Burner cell, prepaid. I'm tracing it. I also asked a few casuals about him. Got one kitchen assistant who said Bell was bragging last week about an underground vegetable about to blow up the food scene. Did you get a look at what he's been handling? Just prep trays and white root veg. One of them might have been a fireback, but it was already sliced and blanched. Hard to tell. Keep eyes on him, I said. And if he gets within 6 feet of a blender, break your own rule and intervene. Understood. I'm sorry, she said. Hazel didn't answer. The door closed behind them. Silence followed deep. Exhausted silence. Bell exhaled, slumping like someone had finally removed the piano from his back. That could have been me, he said. If I'd cooked with that root. Yes, Wolfe said. Your survival was largely accidental. I'm grateful for it. You should be, Wolfe said. Now, if you are finished lamenting the fragility of fortune, you may leave. Bell nodded and left quickly. Hazel lingered. She looked at Wolfe with the quiet weight of someone reconsidering their entire career. I bred. Something dangerous, she said. No, Wolfe corrected her. You bred something rare. The danger came from human flaws: ambition, impatience, greed. The fireback crown is not evil, but it will never be innocent again. She nodded, eyes shining but dry. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. I did not do it. For you, he said. I did it for clarity and for dinner. I saw her smile then, just briefly, and I showed her to the door. When I came back, Wolfe had already summoned Fritz to serve. I joined him at the table, a concession he occasionally allowed when we both earned it. Tonight's meal was rabbit in mustard cream, followed by a salad of red oak lettuce and radish. Notably not turnip, Wolfe ate with quiet satisfaction. When dessert arrived, poached pear with cinnamon and star anise, he finally spoke. "There is a grotesque poetry," he said, "in transforming nourishment into a vehicle of death. It affronts both nature and intellect." I took a bite of pear. "Yeah, well, some people would weaponize air if they could patent the breeze." He nodded slowly. "That is precisely the problem." He didn't speak again for the rest of the meal. Later, as I filed the last of the notes and cleared the evening's correspondence, he called from the office. "Archie?" "Yeah." "No turnips. Ever?" I grinned. "You got it, boss." And with that, the brownstone, once again, settled into its quiet rhythm. Clocks ticking, orchids breathing, the air thick with dinner's echo and the fading scent of trouble. Resolved. The next morning, the brownstone exhaled. That's the only way I can put it. There's a particular stillness that sets in after a case breaks open, and the suspects have scattered like the air itself has stopped bracing for confrontation. The office smelled faintly of Fritz's lemon oil polish, and the chair Wolfe had occupied for the better part of the week had a faint indent. Where he'd worn the leather a fraction smoother. He didn't come down for breakfast. Fritz muttered something about digestive restoration and handed me a plate of soft-boiled eggs, toast, and a small ramekin of stewed prunes. I didn't argue. The man had been through turnip trauma and culinary betrayal. I figured he earned a few liberties in the kitchen. I ate alone, read the paper, and half-waited for the phone to ring. It didn't. Not until after 11. It was Kramer. "I don't like it when you're right, Goodwin," he growled without greeting. "Makes me itchy. That's why I send lotion every Christmas," I said. He ignored that. They traced the account. Wire transfers from Aurelius Foods to Colleen's shell company began 5 months ago. She's been laying groundwork for this for a while. And the lab where Milo collapsed, she had access. Her name was on the leasing agreement, under an alias. Everything Wolfe said checked out. So she's going down. Oh yeah, manslaughter. At the very least. Might even push for 2nd degree if the DA's feeling ambitious. Press is already sniffing around. One of them asked if this was the Turnip murder. I told them to go chew on a raw beet. I chuckled. "You're mellowing with age, Inspector." He grunted. "You and Wolfe stay out of my murder cases for a while. Will you? Tell the murderers to stop getting clever," I replied, and hung up. By then, Wolfe had finally descended. From his orchid room, shoulders stiff but brow unknotted, I gave him the update, down to the last detail. He nodded, not with satisfaction, but with that subtle, inward shrug that meant the world had aligned again if only temporarily. He didn't say anything for a while, just stared out the window, where a sparrow was pecking at one of the azalea planters. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "There's a peculiar cruelty in intellect divorced from ethics. Miss Vestal was not a murderer in impulse, but in calculation. That is rarer and more dangerous. She'll pay," I said. "Yes," he replied, "but the cost will not be hers alone. Hazel Grieve must now live with the consequences of ambition unchecked, even if it was not her finger on the trigger." I didn't argue. Wolfe didn't tolerate philosophical sparring when he was reflecting. He turned and made his way to the red chair with the deliberate motion of a man, letting the world get on with its nonsense while he reclaimed his stillness. "Do we have any outstanding engagements?" he asked. "Just one," I said. "Hazel. Greaves sent a note. Said she'd like to send a small token of thanks. I told her it wasn't necessary. You were correct, but she said it wasn't for you. It was for Fritz." Wolfe narrowed his eyes. "If it is a crate, and if it so much as resembles a root vegetable, you will intercept it, open it, and destroy it." "You got it." He leaned back, picked up a book on Roman culinary practices, and began reading. I left him to it and wandered into the kitchen. Fritz was already prepping lunch turkey galantine, chilled asparagus, and a delicate vinaigrette that smelled like a summer breeze in Burgundy. He was humming again. The trauma had passed. "I hear Hazel's sending you a thank you," I said. He looked up, both flattered and wary. "So long as it is not a bulb." I patted him on the shoulder. "We'll scan it for tubers." Lunch passed uneventfully, and the afternoon settled into one of those rare interludes where the brownstone felt more like a library than a battlefield. I worked through my notes on the case, organizing them for Wolfe's records. He never reread them himself, but he insisted they be present, complete, and free of my more colorful turns of phrase. He called them literary flourishes, unbecoming of a factual record. The doorbell rang at 4:15 p.m. I opened it to find a courier standing there with a long, narrow box wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. The label said, "For Fritz, with gratitude, Hazel Grieve." I tipped the courier, shut the door, and inspected the box like it might tick. No turnip smell, no weight like a crate. I peeled the paper back. Inside was a bottle of rare French Calvados, 2 vintage spice jars, and a handwritten note. "Fritz. Some flavors shouldn't be forgotten, only refined. Thank you for preserving the honest ones." As Ellie brought it into the kitchen, Fritz opened the note, read it, and said nothing for a full minute. Then he nodded once, set the bottle aside, and continued preparing dinner with a touch more flourish in his wrist. That night, Wolfe dined on pigeon la crapaudine with sautéed wild mushrooms. I sat across from him, watching the last light of the day filter through the curtains. He finished the meal in silence, then looked up. "You filed your notes, all except the grocery bill. Exclude the turnips." I smirked. "With pleasure." He tapped a finger on the table. "You will destroy the remaining specimen," he said. "Tomorrow. No ceremony, just oblivion. Done, then." As was his habit after a particularly trying case, he rose, poured a single ounce of beer into a glass, and sipped it slowly by the window. "It is not often," he said, "that murder disguises itself as cultivation. But when it does, it grows quickly, and with that, the brownstone eased back into order. The orchids unbothered, the books undisturbed, and the air as always filtered, fragrant, and finally free of deceit. The following day brought with it a kind of quiet that only settles when every piece of the puzzle has clicked into place, and the final chapter of the file folder reads closed. Outside, spring had started shaking the last sleep from the trees along 35th Street. and a yellow daffodil on the stoop had the audacity to bloom inside the brownstone. Wolfe had returned to his most sacred of postures, ensconced in the red chair, book in hand, brow undisturbed by the vulgarities of murder, ambition, or root vegetables. I, meanwhile, was dealing with the aftermath, the paper kind. Hazel had sent a follow-up note, thanking Wolfe again in what I can only describe as restrained relief. She mentioned she was suspending her work on the Fireback Crown indefinitely, and had donated her research notes, such as they were, to a public agricultural archive in Vermont. My guess? She was trying to put it all behind her and make the turnip someone else's problem. Wolfe had read the letter once, nodded curtly, and set it aside like a museum curator declining a painting with questionable provenance. "You think she's done with the business for good?" I asked, slipping the letter into the file. "No one is ever done," Wolfe replied without looking up. "She may retreat, she may even abstain, but the mind that creates does not uncreate. It waits." He flipped a page, his voice dry as toast. "She will plant again. Something. Eventually." That sounded about right. You don't spend 8 years crossbreeding root vegetables for the culinary elite and just go back to growing carrots. "No," Wolfe said. "Miss Grieve is too proud and too precise." Whoever filmed that clip had access to Milo's lab, familiarity with the strain, and enough moral vacancy to watch a man die. Colleen's hand trembled slightly as she returned, the flash drive to her bag. I walked her out, promised we'd be in touch, and returned to find Wolfe rising from his chair, an event only marginally less rare. "Then a solar eclipse, Archie," he said. "Gather them. All of them, all the suspects, all the participants. Grieve, Prigg, Vestal, Bell. Tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock. My office." He walked to the globe in the corner and rotated it idly. "Someone is playing us for fools. They used science to commit murder. But science cannot conceal motive forever." I knew that tone. It meant he'd begun threading the needle quietly, elegantly, and without telling me how far along the stitching had gone. "Want me to prep the chairs?" I asked. "Yes," he said. And make sure the temperature is comfortable. I want no distractions when I dismantle a killer." And with that, he turned back to his desk and began writing names, lines, sequences. Not a confession, a blueprint for exposure. The next day unfolded with the quiet precision of an orchestra, tuning up for its crescendo. Wolfe issued instructions. Like a general preparing for siege, Fritz was told to prepare a chilled pitcher of lime water, with no alcohol, no coffee, nothing that might elevate heart rates or obscure tells. I was dispatched to make the calls. One by one, I reached them. Hazel Grieve sounded tense but compliant. "I'll be there," she said, and hung up before I could finish the time. Gerard Bell was more nervous. "Is this a trap?" he asked. "If it were," I said, "you'd already be caught." Dr. Prigg grumbled about his schedule and importance, but agreed. "This had better be worthwhile," he muttered. Colleen Vestal didn't hesitate. "If Wolfe's calling us all in," she said, "he knows." By 7:55 that evening, all four were seated in Wolfe's office. Hazel wore a slate-grey dress and clasped her handbag like it contained more than mints and tissues. Belle looked sweatier than a scallop in a frying pan. Prig, as expected, radiated academic disdain. Colleen sat upright, hands folded, eyes alert but unreadable. Wolfe did not speak immediately. He let the room simmer. That was his tactic, let the silence stretch until it formed a skin over the tension, and then puncture it with precision. When he finally spoke, it was like a needle sliding into a balloon. "You are all here," he said, "because one of you orchestrated the theft of an agricultural specimen, the poisoning of a colleague, and a campaign of deception meant to harm Miss Grieve and conceal a fatal error." He paused. Gerard shifted. Hazel's grip on her handbag tightened. "Milo Cafferty died," Wolfe went on, "not by accident, but by consumption of a corrupted strain of the Fireback Crown. Someone ensured he had access to that strain. Someone watched him ingest it, and someone recorded it." He turned to Colleen. "Miss Vestal received that recording. The implication was clear. She was to feel implicated, unsafe, and compelled to act rashly." Colleen said nothing. Wolfe turned to Prig. "You, Dr. Prig, had access to the Bayfield notes and familiarity with the mutation profiles. You also had philosophical disagreement with the commercialization of food genetics. You considered Milo's ambitions vulgar." Prig snorted. "They were." "Yes," Wolfe agreed, "but not criminal, unless you made them so." "I didn't kill Milo." "No," Wolfe said. "You merely judged him. That is not the same." He turned to Belle. "You accepted an anonymous delivery. You used the strain in a professional kitchen. You would have served it to others if not for your palate's intervention." Belle swallowed. "I didn't know. Intent does not annul consequence," Wolfe said coldly. "But I believe your ignorance is genuine." He turned last to Hazel. "You began this, not maliciously, but by omission. You buried Bayfield. You underestimated Milo, and you failed to recognize the danger of a strain you yourself labeled unstable." "I destroyed the field," Hazel said softly. "Not entirely," Wolfe replied. "A sealed jar was kept, and notes survived. You created something you could not fully control, but you did not weaponize it." Hazel sat frozen. No denial, just stillness. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "The question, then, is who had means, access, and motive? Who wanted Milo dead, and who benefited from his silence?" He let the question hang. Then he said, "Archie, that was my cue." I stepped to the side table and picked up the folder Wolfe had handed me earlier. "In the last 48 hours, I said, we confirmed a wire transfer from Aurelius Foods $15,000 to a numbered account in New Jersey. The recipient, Colleen Vestal." Colleen's face didn't change. Not at first. Then her left hand moved to her right wrist, pressing her thumb hard into her pulse point. "That's not," she began. "You burned Milo's letter," I said, "but not to protect Hazel. You burned it because you'd already sold the pitch. You used his idea, his work. You just took credit." "That's a lie," she snapped. "I was trying to stop him." "No," Wolfe interrupted. "You were trying to contain him. He wouldn't go along quietly." So you gave him a specimen knowing it was unstable. You filmed him to ensure you had proof. In case you were implicated, then you mailed it to yourself to complete the illusion of distance. Colleen stood. I won't. You will sit, Wolfe said, without raising his voice. She did. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. You are not a murderer in the traditional sense. You did not strike a blow. You merely failed to warn, failed to stop. You facilitated his death with a calculated absence of conscience. That, Miss Vestal, is a kind of brilliance, and a crime. Hazel gasped. Bill leaned back like he wanted to melt into the upholstery. Prig looked ill. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, call Inspector Kramer. I nodded and moved for the phone. Colleen didn't protest. She just sat there, very still, as though absorbing the idea that the game, whatever it was, had been played to its end. Wolfe leaned back in his chair. Food, he said, should never be used to kill. It is an insult to appetite and to intellect. And with that, the room went quiet except for the slow ticking of the clock on the shelf. Kramer arrived like a storm with a badged trench coat flapping, scowl locked, and jaw working overtime on a dead cigar. He took one step into Wolfe's office, took in the room, and grunted. I got a call from Goodwin saying you had something cooked up. I didn't expect the entree to be ready for plating. Wolfe didn't rise. He never did, even for Inspector Kramer, whose relationship with Wolfe hovered somewhere between mutual disdain and professional codependence. Why? I have not cooked, Wolfe said. I have concluded. Colleen Vestal, still seated, said nothing. She had stopped fidgeting, stopped blinking, stopped everything short of vanishing. She sat like a woman waiting for a verdict she had already memorized. Kramer gave her a glance, then turned to me. Start talking, Goodwin. I laid it out from the beginning. Hazel Greaves' visit, the missing crate, Milo Cafferty's suspicious death, the mysterious turnip paste, the video footage, and finally, the damning wire transfer from Aurelius Foods into an account that traced back to Colleen Vestal's real name, Colleen Madigan, formerly employed as a biotech consultant, with a specialty in, get this, commercial patent circumvention. She played the long game, I said, worked under Hazel, watched Milo get impatient, then made her move. When Milo got close to selling the strain, she saw her window closing. She made sure he ate a specimen from the corrupted Bayfield line. She filmed it, let him die, then mailed the footage to herself to feign distance. Kramer rubbed his chin. You've got documentation? I handed him the folder Wolfe had prepared, including copies of the wire transfer, timestamps on the flash drive file, and a cleaned-up still. From the video, Wolfe, finally speaking again, said, Miss Vestal was clever, but not quite enough. She underestimated Mr. Goodwin's tenacity and my dislike of turnips used as bludgeons. Kramer glanced at Colleen. You got something to say? She looked at him. He wasn't supposed to die. I warned him. I told him not to rush the strain. I thought he'd be smart enough to spit it out. I wanted to scare him, not kill him. That doesn't help you, Kramer said. No, she admitted. But it's true. He sighed. We'll check the financial trail. If it lines up, We'll charge her with negligent homicide. Maybe manslaughter. Depends on what the DA thinks. You'll find it lines up, Wolfe said. I wouldn't have summoned you otherwise. The evidence is adequate. Yeah, Kramer muttered. You'd rather I show up with nothing than too late. He motioned to the officer who had followed him in. Take her. Colleen stood. She didn't fight, didn't cry. She just paused as the cuffs went on and looked once at Hazel. Fritz was humming again Brahms this time while prepping a veal stock so precise. It could have been graded by an architect. That, more than anything, told me the brownstone had healed from its most recent disruption. But as usual, that healing didn't mean idleness. Because while Wolfe may loathe motion, he loathes mental stagnation more. By mid-afternoon, he was already laying out chess problems from an obscure Czech grandmaster and dictating orchid climate notes to me between moves. Then the phone rang. I picked it up, thinking it was the delivery from the Belgian preserves supplier. It wasn't. Goodwin, came the voice. This is Lon Cohen. Lon, I said. How's the paper treating you? Or are you calling because you finally cracked that 6-letter clue in Sunday's puzzle? Neither. Lon replied, though I did notice you've been busy. Kramer wouldn't give me much. But the word turnip came up in a way I'm still processing. I leaned back. Yeah, it's not our usual fare. But the case is closed. Sure, except that Aurelius Foods, the company that wired Colleen the money, they're denying everything. Publicly, their PR is calling it a rogue employee. Says they never approved any purchase of proprietary strains. No record of authorization. No board approval. Nothing. That sounds like cleanup, I said. Fast. And surgical. Exactly. And get this, Colleen's bank account has been drained. The funds she received, gone. Moved to a new shell. Then disappeared into crypto. That got my full attention. Wolfe, I said, covering the mouthpiece. Aurelius is denying involvement, and the money trail just got scrubbed. He didn't move, but his eyes narrowed. Clever. I returned to Lon. What's the play here? I don't know yet, he said. But it smells. Corporate distance. Legal insulation. Someone's protecting the brand while letting Colleen burn for it. I hung up and gave Wolfe the recap. He listened, fingers steepled. The same way he listens to Fritz recite wine pairings, interested, but skeptical. So, I said, was Colleen the whole game, or just the last pawn? Wolfe closed his book with a soft thump. She was the fulcrum, he said, the pivot point, but not the lever. Someone else exerted the force. You think Aurelius paid her off, then buried the trail? More likely, Wolfe said, they positioned her to be useful and disposable. Think she knew? She suspected, but ego blinded her. She believed she could outmaneuver them. He sighed. She could not. I nodded slowly. So, they let her do the dirty work. Use her ambition. Then, once Milo was gone and the strain potentially cleared for sale, they disavow her. Wolfe finished. Publicly cleanse. Privately proceed. You think they'll still try to market the fireback? He pursed his lips. They would be fools to waste the investment. But now they will rename it, repackage it, and scrub its origins. A new label, a new narrative, and the world will forget. He paused. Except us. That, too, sounded about right. I spent the rest of the afternoon drafting a supplemental report. Wolfe dictated a paragraph outlining Aurelius's potential culpability in such cool, indirect language it read like a botanical theory of crime. He refused to send it to Kramer. He has what he needs, Wolfe said, and what he cannot use, he will ignore. That evening, as we sat to dinner, pheasant breast in lemon glaze, with spring peas and parsleyed new potatoes, I found myself thinking back to Milo. What did he see in that last hour, before his body betrayed him? Triumph, greed, regret. Do you think he knew he'd been set up? I asked Wolfe. He carved a bite of pheasant with surgical delicacy. He knew he was clever, he said. And that is the first mistake of any fool. I took a sip of wine and nodded. And Hazel, she will recover. Women of intellect and pride often do. He raised his glass to survival of the right kind. We clinked glasses gently. Later that night, as I filed the final additions to the case, I slid the folder into its shelf. Wolfe doesn't label his cases alphabetically. He sorts them by complexity, moral, not logistical. This one, I noticed, slid in just after the affair of the painted teacup and just before the Codex catastrophe. It felt like the right place. As I turned off the office lights, I glanced back once at Wolfe's chair. It sat empty, still, waiting for the next intrusion to upset the brownstone's balance. But for now, the chair and the house was quiet, and that was enough. The morning after I filed the last of the notes, the brownstone fell back into the rhythm Wolfe liked best, uneventful, uninterrupted, and entirely within his control. The orchids resumed their rightful position as the most pressing concern in the house. Fritz returned to preparing sauces so delicate I was afraid to breathe near them. And Wolfe, having rid himself of the taint of murder and intellectual fraud, sank deeper into his books, muttering things in Latin to himself that I decided not to interpret. I, meanwhile, had plans to enjoy the peace. I took a walk, just a stroll down Madison and back, long enough to smell spring in the air and count the number of cafes already putting up chalkboard menus offering things like foraged ramps with fennel pollen and turnip chevish. I shook my head at that last one. Some people never learn. By the time I returned, there was a letter waiting for Wolfe, hand-delivered and marked private. I assumed it was another thank you from Hazel or a law firm threatening libel, because someone hadn't liked where Wolfe placed their ethics on the food chain. I passed it to him without comment. He opened it with more interest than I expected. It was from Dr. Amos Prigg. Wolfe, though I detest melodrama, I owe you a brief statement. I have resigned my post. The events surrounding Miss Greaves' strain and the tragedy that followed have reminded me that science divorced from humanity is not neutral. It is cruel. I was not a criminal, but I was complicit in arrogance. For that, I will spend time in retreat and away from the laboratories where that arrogance flourishes. Perhaps something better will grow in its place. Wolfe read it twice. Then he folded it and tucked it into the file marked closed, turnip case. He has a conscience, he said, but no flair. That's probably a blessing, I said. Flair gets people into more trouble than out of it. He nodded once, and that was the last we spoke of Dr. Prigg. At lunch. We received a call from Saul Panzer. He was brief and to the point. He'd been following up on loose ends because Saul doesn't let go of threads Wolfe hasn't explicitly told him to drop. Turns out, Aurelius Foods had gone quiet. Not just corporate PR quiet, but buried in paperwork quiet. The subsidiary that made the payments to Colleen had been dissolved. New business filings were popping up in Chicago and Denver, all under different names but showing signs of the same people in the background. Their repositioning, Saul said, laundering the brand, new names, new language, same ambitions. The fireback might show up. Again, just not by that name. I thanked him and relayed it to Wolfe, who responded with a single syllable. Predictable. We both knew Aurelius wasn't going to vanish. You don't put that much time and money into a new product, even a potentially toxic one, and then walk away. No, they'd rebrand. Call it something else. Dress it up with sustainability language and boutique packaging, and sell it to chefs hungry for novelty. But Wolfe wouldn't interfere. That wasn't his role. His role was to isolate the infection, expose it, and step back. He wasn't the law. He was its reminder. That evening, Wolfe invited me to share dinner, a rare gesture and one I never turned down. Fritz had prepared lamb ribs with white bean puree and a citrus parsley cremelotta. The meat fell off the bone with the barest pressure. Dessert was preserved kumquats over mascarpone cream. And I made the mistake of asking if they'd been sourced from Hazel Greaves' network. Wolfe didn't answer. He just looked at me over the rim of his wine glass and raised a single brow. That was enough. After dinner, we returned to the office. Wolfe opened a fresh bottle of beer and poured exactly 3 fingers into his glass, which he sipped like he was conducting an evaluation rather than a refreshment. I was about to call it a night when he spoke. Archie. Yeah, you were. Efficient, direct, undistracted. I commend your work. Coming from Wolfe, that was like being knighted. I leaned a little against the desk. Well, thanks. You know how I get when vegetables try to start wars. He allowed the faintest flicker of amusement. Food, he said, is a bond. Cultural, intellectual, sensual. It is meant to nourish, not conquer. When that bond is violated, the result is never merely culinary. It is personal. He took another sip of beer. Miss Vestal forgot that, as did Mr. Cafferty. They saw glory. They missed responsibility. And Hazel. She forgot how easily vision becomes vendetta. She will remember. Now. He stood, stretched, and walked to the window. Outside, the city was breathing again, honking, bustling, alive. Spring doesn't wait for moral clarity. It moves ahead with its own timing. Wolfe looked out at it and added, people believe intellect alone can guide them. They are wrong. Intellect without conscience is fire without stone. It burns. It does not build. That was his final word for the night. I left him there, standing in the dark, sipping his beer as the orchids in the next room prepared to bloom again. And in the morning, we would begin a new another knock another case, another breach in the sanctuary. But for tonight, at least, the brownstone was whole, and the turnips, thank heaven, were gone. It was for days after Colleen Vestal was taken away in cuffs, and the brownstone had returned to what passes for peace in a house ruled by routine, ruled further by a man who once banned a federal agent for wearing suede shoes indoors. Wolfe had resumed his breakfast regimen, his afternoon orchid sessions, and his singular war against clutter of thought, of food, and especially of emotion. I'd been expecting the usual fade to stillness, but the world had other plans. On the fifth morning, just as I was considering a mid-morning trip to Lucho's for their potato pancakes, the doorbell rang, not frantically, just firm enough to imply business, not trouble. It was Hazel Grieve. She looked different this time, lighter, not in weight, but in whatever it was that used to crease her brow, like a field furrowed before frost. She wore a navy blazer over dark denim, no makeup, no gloves, just presence. "I need 5 minutes," she said. "Then I'll be gone." I showed her in. Wolfe was in his chair, reading a monograph on edible tubers of the Southern Hemisphere. He looked up as I announced her, and to his credit, didn't sigh. "Miss Grieve," he said, "do you wish to thank me again, or revise your statement?" "Neither," she said. "I came to say I've decided to continue my work." That raised an eyebrow. "Not the fire back," she added. "That strain is done. It'll be catalogued and sealed. But something new, something less volatile, less ambitious. I've learned something from this. That matters." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "The human tendency to confuse vision with destiny has led to more corpses than I care to count." She sat this time uninvited and leaned forward. "There's something else. You said Colleen acted alone. I believe that. But someone gave her permission to believe it was survivable, that she could slip through, that the world would buy her version of the story." She slid a folded sheet of paper across the desk. "I found this in Milo's old project file, hidden in the lining of a folio. A letter from a consultant working with Aurelius, not signed. But it references the fireback by its internal trial name. Whoever wrote it knew what Milo had and wanted him to deliver, with or without your consent. Wolfe, read the letter." I watched his eyes move faster than usual. "She was guided," he murmured. "Not coerced, but flattered, shaped." Hazel nodded. "You were right. She wasn't the lever, just the hand that thought it was pulling the strings." "Ah, you asking me to pursue this?" "No," Hazel said. "I'm asking you to know. Because knowing matters." Wolfe leaned back. "Very well." She stood, finally, and gave me a nod. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "thank you for not treating me like a hysteric." "I try to limit that to 1 client a month," I replied. She smiled, and it was real this time. After she left, Wolfe sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, he spoke. "We will not pursue Aurelius. No, no. That is for regulators, crusaders, and young attorneys with expensive briefcases. They will obfuscate, deny, and re-emerge with another name." He looked out the window. But they will know, he said softly. They will know we know, and that, for some, is unbearable. He stood and walked to the globe, spun it once, and stopped it with a finger over the northeast corner of France. Archie, he said, we will need a new crate of Valenque cheese. The good one, not the imposter. Consider it done. I said, that night, after dinner duck eel arrange and braised endive sat in the office. The case finally behind us. Wolfe drank his beer in contemplative silence. Food, he said at last, can be many things. A joy, a language, a weapon. But it should never, he added, be used as a lie. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. He picked up his book, and I turned off the desk lamp. Outside, the city moved on hungry, noisy, too fast to remember a scandal involving a root vegetable. But inside the brownstone, the record stood, clear, precise, unforgiving. Another case, wrapped and shelved. Another intrusion defeated, and the kitchen at last was safe again.